Many people ask me questions about Stoic philosophy and practice. I've created this series to provide short answers to the most common, recurring, or confusing questions about Stoicism. A common challenge to Stoicism, particularly on their views about nature and living in accordance with nature, stems from using a passage from Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil and saying, didn't Nietzsche prove that the Stoics are wrong? The short answer to this question is no, Nietzsche did not prove that the Stoics have nature or living in accordance with nature wrong, but there's a lot more to say about the topic. I think that in a case like this, it's very helpful to look at what Nietzsche actually says in this passage, which is early on in Beyond Good and Evil. It's section 9 of chapter 1 on the prejudices of philosophers. So here's what he actually says. You want to live according to nature. Oh, you noble Stoics, what fraudulent words. Think of a being such as nature is, prodigal beyond measure, indifferent beyond measure, without aims or intentions, without mercy or justice, at once fruitful and barren and uncertain. Think of indifference itself as a power. How could you live according to such indifference? So that's one important passage. He continues, to live, is this not precisely wanting to be other than this nature, is living not valuating, preferring, being unjust, being limited, wanting to be different, and even if your imperative live according to nature meant at bottom the same thing as live according to life, how could you not do that? Why make a principle of what you yourselves are and must be? So that's another important part of this passage. Then he continues and says, the truth of it is, however, quite different. While you rapturously pose as deriving the canon of your law from nature, you want something quite the reverse of that. You strange actors and self-deceivers, your pride wants to prescribe your morality, your ideal to nature, yes, to nature itself, and incorporate them in it. You demand that nature should be nature according to the Stoa and would like to make all existence exist only after your own image as a tremendous eternal glorification and universalization of Stoicism. So these are some of the criticisms that Nietzsche is making in that passage that people take as a challenge to Stoic doctrine. Now, before we consider each of these 3 points in turn, let's think for a moment about a big assumption that people are making in raising this very question. Does having a criticism that some famous philosopher gives of a particular doctrine automatically mean that that doctrine is thereby refuted, nullified, disproved? The answer is no, because the person who's making the criticism could actually be off base or could be talking about something quite different, which happens to be the case with this particular passage. So think about the first thing that Nietzsche said in here. He has a very different conception of nature than what the Stoics do, and totally understandable. Nietzsche is coming from very different philosophical bases. He is elaborating a very different philosophical position. So this is sort of like somebody, in one genre of music saying, wow, you don't play it all the way that I do. His notion of nature, he says, is a being that is prodigal without measure, indifferent beyond measure, without aims and intentions, without mercy or justice. And that just isn't what the Stoics are calling nature. So just saying, I mean this and you mean that, therefore you're wrong, that's not a very good refutation. The second part of the passage makes two interesting moves. One is to say that here's what living actually is, and so that has to be the opposite of nature. Of course, notice nature as I, Nietzsche, have understood it and articulated it to you. So a Stoic could just say, well, I don't agree with what you think nature is. Then he says, what you Stoics are saying is really just vacuous. I mean, if you mean living in accordance with life. How can you not do that? Everybody's doing that already. So you're really just uttering a truism or a tautology that doesn't mean anything. And again, you have to ask yourself, is that what the Stoics actually mean, or is Nietzsche caricaturing them? His third criticism, I think, really gets to the heart of the matter. He is saying, listen, you Stoics, I know that you have a different conception of nature than I do, I who am actually right about it. And what you're doing is kind of intellectual sleight of hand. You're reading into nature what it is that you're wanting to find in nature. And then, surprise, surprise, you actually do find it. So what you're doing is, in essence, just assuming. It's like a circular form of reasoning, or, if you like, of inquiry. And again, you have to ask yourself, is Nietzsche actually, depicting the Stoics in a fair light here? I think just a brief reading of Stoic text shows that Nietzsche is actually off base on this one. There may be criticisms that one can give of Stoicism and of certain assumptions that they're making, but this isn't it. As a last note, I'd like to say we can generalize this a little bit further. It's not just about Nietzsche and the Stoics and this particular passage. Anytime that you're bringing up somebody who is criticizing somebody else, you want to make sure that the criticism is, in fact, on base. They're not attributing to those other people something that they're not saying. They are criticizing them for things that, you don't have to automatically buy into their system in order to say that makes sense. And that isn't the case here, and that isn't the case with many of the criticisms, not only of Stoicism, but other philosophical positions. You want to be very careful in adopting other philosophers' critical assessments of people whose philosophical bases, systems, and orientations they do not share. If you found this answer helpful for you, then please share it with others who might benefit from it. This work is entirely supported by crowdfunding on my Patreon site. So if you find it valuable, consider becoming a supporter at patreon.com/Sadler.